Excellent. Right. Phew. Worked. My name is Kai. I'm a developer advocate here at Civo. And what that means is that aside from developing features for our website, which, as has been said, it's mad busy, I get to rep presentations like this and do stuff with our community and encourage people to use Civo. So it's a fun job. We're going to sort of take a slightly different path now. We're going to be looking at a tool to audit your Kubernetes resources, among other things, but sort of, in the vein of looking at your continuous deployment, right? So the scenario is you should know what you're deploying. Basically, how can you trust the configurations and code that you're running, especially you work in a distributed team, so you might have people sort of putting stuff in. How can you be sure that all of that stuff is good? And then I've been on some Kubernetes user groups where somebody asks a question and, like, how do I do X type of monitoring, and, it's like, is immediately the replies are like, just apply this, kubectl apply -f github.com/whatever. And then, it's a question of like whether you should be doing that in the first place. So, and then how many of those deployments are made, without second thought, and even if they're not malicious, they may be perpetuating sort of non-best practice. So, and how many people actually bother to read through their manifest files with any regularity? What if there was a tool for this? Like, wouldn't it be great that you could have something do the heavy lifting of sifting through a bunch of YAML on your behalf? And, you wouldn't have to worry so much. What we need is a static analysis tool. And for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the term static analysis, it means the analysis of code without actually running it. So you're not running it through a debugger step by step, you're having something step through the code without actually having to build it and run it. So it's sort of debugging in place. And then it'd be great to have a tool that could do that for YAML, because YAML. So, for this presentation, I'm going to use Checkov from BridgeCrew. So what's Checkov? Not that guy, that's Checkov, the author. And that's Pavel Checkov from Star Trek. We don't need him either, sorry. What we need is this. So this is Checkov, which is a tool for auditing infrastructure as code, but also does analysis of Kubernetes components like services, deployments, things like that. It's not the only Kubernetes static analysis tool of this kind, but I found it neat because not only does it do YAML Kubernetes stuff, you can also run it against Terraform or any other sort of infrastructure as code things. So their website is checkov.io. What I want to do is, what we're going to do is run Checkov on a cluster and locally. So we're briefly going to show all the things that Checkov checks for in a Kubernetes audit. We're going to run a check on a manifest file that I've pulled from kx.io. So it's like a very sort of, recommended piece of thing. But as I mentioned, as the slides mentioned earlier, Checkov is incredibly opinionated out of the box. So you'll see it spits out a bunch of sort of queries and not errors as such, but just failed checks. And then we're going to run it on an existing cluster setup and view the log that it creates. So I hope you can now see my desktop with the terminal on it. Thumbs up. Yes, cool. Excellent. So what we're going to do is...
You may want to make the font a little larger, though.
Yep, I was just about to ask that. How's that for you? Any better? Yeah, cool. So we're going to get the cluster analysis job going first because it takes a minute or so. So we're just going to basically create a job for it and then have it do it in the background. So what we're going to do is we're going to, I said I would show you all the checks that it runs as part of a standard suite. And there's obviously various frameworks. Like I said, it does Terraform, it does, various other things. So, there's a bunch. So there's what, 139 total tests from things like, are you using the correct namespace, and are you applying security contexts, and do you specify readiness probes and things like that. So I'm going to run this same check on this file, which is from k8s.io, which is an Nginx, your basic Nginx sort of deployment. So we're going to do Checkov-f, so for file.
Can't see the command.
Sorry. Thank you. Bear with me. I'm going to just resize my terminal. Can you see it there? Any better?
Yes.
So this is running through an existing YAML, and you can see that it has failed a bunch of these tests. Again, like I said, out of the box, Checkov is very opinionated. It sort of does everything according to the book. So it passed 16 and failed 15 of its relevant things for this deployment. And if you then were to look at, okay, what does containers should not share the host IPC namespace mean, you can just go to the appropriate page. It describes what the actual rationale for the rule is, and whether how you can remediate it, assuming that you want to. If you don't want to remediate a rule, you can just specify in your runner, especially if you're doing it for CI/CD, to not actually skip the So let's say you don't care about rule 34, then you tell it to skip rule 34. And then finally, we can quickly check up on our job that I just ran. So what I had is a cluster, 2-node Civo cluster with everything standard out of the box, nothing installed, nothing running except for what K3's on our service deploys out of the box. And yeah, there's a couple of things that, So for example, use read-only file system for containers where possible. You might care about that, you might not care about that. So there's various things that you can fix, and you can see handily exactly in the file concerned where the sort of component fails. So you can audit your code as part of an already existing cluster, or before you deploy anything. So you can run it on any kind of Kubernetes resource YAML files, or you can hook it up to your CI/CD system. So there's native support for GitLab, GitHub Actions, which have both been talked about, and a bunch of things like Jenkins. So you can have this run with your specific requirements on every deploy, which means that you won't ever be committing things that you don't think you should be. So thanks everybody for bearing with me. I just sort of whistle-stop toured through that, but I thought that as a tool that was quite cool. And I'll be sure to try and answer any questions you might have. If you don't have a question you want to ask now, I'm pretty much always in the Civo community Slack, so you absolutely should ask me there, and I'll try and help, or then rope somebody much smarter than me in, either from the Civo team or from the community. So yeah, thanks very much.
There's a couple of questions for you, Kai.
All right, let's have them.
So Ayani, how does this compare to most linting tools out there for Kubernetes manifests? Some people made a lot of manifest linters, but how does this weigh versus the competing projects?
This so from what I've tried, and I've tried a couple just to this one's faster. Like it plus the fact that then it does all your infrastructure as code setup, so not just Kubernetes, but it'll you can feed it Terraform scripts or anything else.
And the actual guides on their website as well for each of the rules look very cool as well. Give
yeah,
more information on what it means.
Yeah, they're super informative, down to like comment this line out if you don't want this particular thing to do, or you can change the parameters and everything else. So.
Or maybe if anyone's got any experience with any other tools, feel free to discuss them in the community Slack, and we can, yeah, keep going with the discussion there.
Sorry, there's a few other questions popping in now. I think this one's for you as well, Kai. It's from Nathan Thomas. How do you filter the rules there?
So there's a command line option for skip, and then you put in the numbers that you wanted to skip, or you then, as part of your configuration file in your CI/CD job, you just tell it to skip whichever ones that you're not particularly worried about.
Okay, and just another follow-up question from Nitin there. Is it a job?
So you can run it as a Kubernetes job if you want. So I ran it on my existing cluster, but so if you were spinning up a cluster, deploying stuff on it, and then you could run it, or you can also audit in place the files before they even go on.
There's another question from an anonymous attendee. I think this, Andy, this might be for you. Do you think it's helpful if we can have Checkov static lint as part of the Civo feature?
It's a good question. I mean, the only thing is, as Kai's talk kind of highlighted, there's various ones where it's maybe up to you if you want to do that or not. I mean, it may well be the sort of thing that if people are running this and consistently finding issues within the cluster, maybe that's something we can change in the defaults. But again, we tend to stick to as standard K3S as we can. We try not to mess with it too much during installation. We want it to be compatible. If you just downloaded K3S, installed it on your machine, or you used our K3S service, we don't mess with it too much. So potentially, if the default K3S installation out of the box has some issues, then we'd probably look at either encouraging community to raise that up to Rancher's K3S project, or we could do it. But I think it would be sort of an upstream thing if it's consistently having issues that the community agrees should be fixed.
And one of the things that I really wanted to stress in that is that Checkov is sometimes needlessly strict. So, and that's why I ran it on the official Kubernetes Nginx demo deployment, because it spits out 15 not errors, but warnings on that, which you wouldn't expect to be ever prone if they're offering that as here, try this as a deployment. So it's a little bit make of it what you will as a tool. It's not designed necessarily to be a one-size-fits-all solution.